let's look back over the 2023-2024 NBA season. What do we get right? What were our hits for the fantasy season? Michael Bolton?
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I recently received a promotion. I am now the head of the Tortured Poets department. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at LockedOnFantasyBasketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LockedOnNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms. So if you're only a single banger, why don't you level it up? Double banging is the way to go. Thumb up, comment, ring the bell, and go download the audio, watch the video. After the playoffs are over for the day, just put it on repeat, just keep going. That's where we're at with this. So what we're going to look at, the hits of the fantasy season. It's very easy to just spout off stuff, and I do all the time. But what I wanted to do in this show was have a look at the guys that we got right. And there are a couple of ways of looking at that, I think. It's the players that you were lower on than others that ended up being correct, so you avoided them. The players that you were higher on than others that ended up being good, so you were able to get them ahead of the pack. All right, I think that's the best way to do it. So I used a bunch of different... Actually, you know what? I'll put it up now. We're looking at the ones that won, the picks that were solid, the ones that ended up being pretty good value for whatever reason. And sometimes you might be 10, 15 spots ahead of a guy, and he ends up beating that number by 60 spots. All right, and you go, okay, was it a win? Like, sure. Was it 100% accurate? No. But that's how the nature of all this stuff goes. So there are a lot of different ways that I tried to look at this in terms of, we don't care if it was the guy was 150th in ADP and we had him 145th. That doesn't mean anything, right? That's not a win. That's not anything. We know that if we were off by 5 spots in the... or 10 spots in the first round, and that's impactful. It's a big negative impact. And we did that when we talked about bust of the year of guys like Steph going at pick 6 or whatever it was on Yahoo and ended up being at 18. Like, that's such a big hit, even though it's only one round. Like, it hurts a lot to lose that much value. So I try to, put all that sort of stuff into perspective when we're talking about how we're going to view what was actually good and what wasn't for the season. So what was actually good here? Or how did I view it? So I looked at a few different things. I looked at what the majority of, say this all the time, majority of people play head-to-head categories. The next group of people are head-to-head points. The next group after that is Roto Leagues. Very small percentage of people. So traditional rankings always skew towards Roto because it's just the way that the rankings have been, and people don't like to look into that and view it in any sort of way that adjust to the way the game is played. So I always tend to look at -1 rankings because that is the best way, I believe, to look at head-to-head value. And we look at per-game stuff because, again, if you can predict an injury, good luck to you. You're the greatest of all time, and you're going to be precogging Minority Report style because no one can do it. If you think you can, you can't. Simple. So we're looking at per-game -1 projections preseason from me. Where did I have them? I took a snapshot of my -1 ranking list the day before opening night, just to have a look where I had people positioned after preseason was done. I looked at the Yahoo ADP from that same day. I looked then at the end of season per game -1 rankings. I weighted that for impact, whereas a 10 spot hit at 140 is nowhere near as important as a 10 spot hit at number 30 or number 20. So weighted that for impact, but I didn't actually go past those first 11 rounds. We always look to get what we want rounds 1 through 10, probably into 11 as our first bench guy. Then we start to just chuck flyers out all over the shop in those last couple of rounds. That's a general process that we go through the majority of the time. So if someone's coming in with an ADP of 144 and I had him at 120 or 24 spot, but it doesn't matter. Like your last rounds are your hits, right? Or your big flies. So I'm not going to take credit for those ones that hit versus the ones that miss, etc., etc. So that's the way that I'm approaching this. Now, again, this is based on the way that I projected stuff out. So when I talked all through my mock drafts and when I did all my lists and when I had all the stuff at Basketball Monster, these are the projections that I was working on. So these are the way that I looked at players. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. I'm going to go through the ones that I think were the most important ones here, or the ones that gave a nice little snapshot. And you might even, like, some of them are going to be, you might have some disagreements on them, and that's okay. No, I'll explain why. And we'll actually just get to the first one, because I think there will be some disagreements there. But I do think that Trey Young was actually a hit for me this season. And I know that he got hand surgery. I know that he missed that time down the stretch. But to me, that's not really a part of what we do. Part of, I preach a lot about process, about how did we get the process right in terms of projecting the per game numbers and his role in the offense and all that sort of stuff. How did we get it right? You can't, if Trey Young hurts his finger in November and then plays all the way through April and end of March, then what an absolute W that is. But you can't, there's no way to predict that stuff. So again, it's more about how did the process look? How did the value look? We can't do that stuff with injuries. It's really, and there are two names on this that will be the similar sort of thing. Because again, it's not about, hey, this guy got hurt, what an absolute disaster situation. Because again, you can't know that. It's impossible to know that. It's about how did our methodology, the way we look at it, the way we project it, the way we know the team, how did that stuff work out? I think that is way more important, way more useful for looking forward, for making any sort of moves versus, someone actually needed him in the deck and he missed 10 games in March, so therefore, what a bust, right? I don't think that's as important. So I say all this about Trey Young, understanding that he missed that period of time at the end of the year. And again, there would have been a lot of people drafting Trey Young. Man, never gets hurt. He's so durable. He's always there. Again, can't predict it. Doesn't happen. Yep, we got that. I had Trey 11th in my -1 rankings to begin the season. He finished 10th in -1 rankings. That's bang on. His ADP was 18, and while that's only a 7-spot difference, right, that's important at that point. That is middle to end of the second round versus the end of the first round. And 18 is the average, so yes, he would have gone higher than that, but that means also that he was going lower than that. He was going to get 20 and 21 and 22 and 23, which is a wild spot to be considering Trae Young. And part of that is people going, oh, but he just turns it over so much. Yeah, don't care. Or, oh man, his field goal percentage. Also, don't care. You shouldn't care about any of that stuff when you're viewing those certain players and what they're able to do in certain positions, right? We understand, I think, we understand how all of that stuff should work by now. He also averaged 45 fantasy points, which ranked him 13th. So if you ended up getting Trey at the end of round 2, again, in a roto league, let's talk roto. In a roto league, that's pretty good value. In the head-to-head, the injury does hurt, but overall, in terms of understanding what Trey's value is, where the projection sat with him, it's basically bang on. A back-end first-round player ended up as a back-end first-round player. I don't think you could do much better than that, especially when you're going over half a round earlier than where people were taking him when we're talking second round. That's important. That's a big jump up. So I was pretty happy with how that one panned out. Again, you'll just say Josh Biddy was hurt in the playoffs. Again, that's not the if you're going to talk about playoff value and playoff availability, then Luka Doncic wasn't worth it because he had a 2-game week and he was 50th in that week. So, what do you do with that? Cool? Got it. I hope. Again, disagree. Leave the comments. I love the comments. They're great. Next one. This is, again, should we get into it? Nah, you know what? We'll get into that one in a second. Because I'm going to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by old mates Monopoly Go. Yeah. Monopoly Go. It is, we all know Monopoly. We know the classic game Monopoly, but now we've got the Go version. The one that's on your phone, and you can get competitive with stuff. You get up against your friends, and you're going to beat you. I'm going to get all your money. I'm going to take your properties. I'm going to get in and do bank heists. It's actually super, super fun. And I'm actually going to go into my Monopoly Go today. I might actually chuck it in the show notes here. Mate, I don't know if there's some sort of friend link or something like that, but you guys can go up against me. We can see who's going to get the most stuff going. You charge rent on those properties. They can go in and knock down buildings in your city that you build up. You go through different boards in different levels. I don't know where I'm up to on mine. I think I'm up to the Wild West, which I think is board 7 on my Monopoly Go. So get in there, join it with your friends, compete against them, team up with them as well for larger field tournaments. Download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store and on Google Play. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which means getting tickets to go watch the baseball is even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually also go down the closer you get to the first pitch. In fact, they even sell discounted tickets after first pitch. So if you happen to be just walking around the old ballpark area, open up the Game Time and see like you might get some real cheap tickets to go in and watch whatever it is team that's playing in your local area. Go local sports team. So you get your last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, which is just like you pick an area. You go, I'm going to sit somewhere there. And they go, don't worry, big fella. I'm going to pick the seat for you. And you end up saving money from that as well, because that's what we're all about. Transparency, which is what Game Time does. Taking the worry out of it, the work out of it, and getting to go and see fun events at cheaper prices. And that is where Game Time comes in. So take that guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create the account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, so we talked Trey Young. Let's talk about another one, which again, there's always every single thing. You can put out a list of sleepers and hits or misses or busts or whatever you want to do. Everything has context and nuance associated with it. So I'm going to come and tell you that Daniel Gafford was a massive hit. All right, huge hit. I had him on more teams than I had any single player through draft season. I was big on it because I just said they don't have other centers. He is a great fantasy player, not a very good real-life player, but a great fantasy player, and there is no one to contest him. And that was true. And he went really, really strong. Then he got traded to Dallas, and I'm a little bit worried here. I think they should start him over Derek Lively. But then all of those idiots, Doncic and Kidd, come out, no, it's great. We just traded for a backup. Fantastic. He played 17 minutes a night for the first 4 weeks he was there. And I went, all right, I don't think Gafford's that good. They seem committed to having him as a backup. So I'm dropping him. And then, of course, he hit 175 shots in a row and was awesome for a stretch of time. But we also did see, I'm recording this after their game against the Clippers, game 1 in the playoffs, that he barely played because, again, on court, he is not that good. So I like to use a lot of that stuff when someone is not, I don't think, a very good real-life player, and then they're being marginalized by the team and the coach and the players are saying certain things about a role, and we see it play out. I'm going to go, well, I actually don't think he's good enough to push through that, but ended up being wrong. So why is Daniel Gafford hit? Because I was big on getting him. That's simple as that. Huge hit, I think, because I was very big on drafting him. I drafted him in so many spots. I had him 68th in the preseason. He ended 53rd for -1 rankings. Again, if you're going to look at straight Yahoo rankings, because they include turnovers, they'll bump him way higher. And then if you end up using that number to go into next season and drafting him in the 3rd round, you're going to get wrecked. Like, you're not going to win. So I had him 68th. He ended up 53rd. His ADP was 101st. So I was way ahead of that, like massively ahead of that. And that turned out like I still wasn't high enough with it, even though I dropped him. Like after those 4 weeks that he was there in Dallas, I dropped him. Idiot. He averaged 30 fantasy points. That was 85th. Overall, it's an unequivocal success for Daniel Gafford as a fantasy player this season. It's an unequivocal success for you if you didn't drop him. For me, it's a half measure success because I got him. I took advantage of it for 70% of the season, and then I was a fool, yeah? Like very, very clearly that I made the wrong call there. But, I think, again, always, process is important. Why did I do it? This is why I did it. Comes out wrong. Happens. You eat it, and that's what goes on. So that's where we are with old Danny Gafford. The next one was an interesting one as well. I ended up with this guy on quite a few of my teams, and most of my teams that I had him on, I think they all finished either first or second through the regular season because I was able to get him at a discount because I know that the talent is there, and that is Kawhi Leonard. Leonard was I had him 19th in the preseason. He ended up 16th in -1 rankings. Yahoo had his ADP at 27. Remembering, that is the start of the 3rd round ADP, meaning that he was going towards the back end of the 3rd. I saw him going at like 37, 38, 40 in drafts. Like, I know that there's been a lot of injury problems with Kawhi, and of course now we get to the end of the season, he missed the last 2 weeks of the year, and now he's not there in the playoffs. Is that because he pushed through and played more games than the regular season and reduced some of the plans that they had in terms of keeping him healthy? Who's to say? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I couldn't tell you whether that's true or not. It's just frustrating that Kawhi played the most games he's played in a period of time, and now he's hurt. But it is also worth noting that he wasn't injured heading into the season. So there was always, that's why I was big on this. He wasn't coming off an ACL. And I know that Kawhi's talent was huge. So he was healthy-ish. I didn't expect him to play as many back-to-backs as he did, but also remember, he played a back-to-back the year before. He played a back-to-backs before the ACL injury, so he'd been pushing back to playing ACLs. He just had 2 knee injury setbacks that cost him that. So I had that in the back of my head that there will be a chance for him to do this. He averaged 42 fantasy points, which put him 25th. Again, that 27 ADP, I looked at it like, really? He was going to get 27? I was able to get him at I got him at 23, 24, 25 in a lot of different spots. Start of the third, end of the second round. I really didn't have the balls necessarily to go into the middle of the first round or anything, middle of the second round or anything along those lines, but I was more than happy to do it and get him, and I think it worked out pretty well to get Kawhi in those situations. But, again, maybe you disagree. Maybe your league went until the wrong time, the end of the season, and Kawhi didn't play and it cost you. Again, that's hard to judge. This is one that I sort of forgot that I was big on, and then I went back to look at it and I was like, yeah, I was actually pretty high on Rudy Gobert, and I didn't really remember that was the case. People were massively out on Gobert because he struggled in that season, first season in Minnesota. He struggled in a big way. We saw the block rate drop off. We saw how's it going to fit with Towns. We saw some of his rebound numbers drop, even though Towns got hurt. His minutes were down. He just didn't look right. I had him 45th, -1 in the preseason. He ended up 31st, and his ADP was 65. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I drafted him at 45 because I didn't. It would have been like mid to late 50s that I was getting him in a lot of spots. If I think I got him in 1 or 2 drafts. But it's all dependent again on your team. But he exceeded that expectation, like 31 versus 65, ADP versus end of season rankings, a huge jump. I was 20 spots ahead of ADP on my ranking, so you were able to get ahead of that, I think, and get some value out of him. He averaged 38 fantasy points, which is 42nd, and it doesn't. I don't. When people talk about the biggest steals or improvements or re-breakouts or whatever, Gobert's name never gets mentioned. But he was going here round 6. He's like a 3rd, 4th round type of a player. That's pretty good value. And it just never gets mentioned how much of a bounce back Gobert actually had. Because that's super impressive, what Rudy was able to do. And I'm okay with where I was able to have him at the start of the year. Again, not quite as high as it should have been. But feeling a little bit more confident in him than the general populace, I guess, who had that ADP coming in at number 65. So relatively okay with the way that ended up playing out. Coby White was a pretty big hit for me. I had him 113th in the preseason, which is not where it should have been. It should have been higher. He should have been ranked better. But I was very confident from very early on in the preseason because I got told that he is going to be the starting point guard, which when things opened up the end of August, start of September, nobody, I don't think, expected Coby White would be the starting point guard. We thought they'd brought in Javon Carter. They might go Oyedosuma. I never thought that White would get that job, even though I did like him as a player and there was some value there. But we were ahead of that for everybody, and it was very much grab him in those last rounds. Grab him. But I didn't expect him to do this. Now, part of what he did was because of the Levine injury. Absolutely no doubt. That bumped his usage up. He had some inconsistencies, and he was inconsistent to start the season, but I was pretty big on holding him through that. He ended up 85th overall in -1 numbers. His ADP was 139th. So that's basically just have a crack in the last round, which again was one of those things we talked about, grabbing him there. But he was also one of the players that I wanted to get round 10, round 11. He's a starting point guard. And my thing was, starting point guard with decent usage. I'm pretty interested in him in fantasy just as a general rule. Starting point guard with usage. Good option. And he ended up playing almost the most minutes in the entire league. He averaged 33 fantasy points overall, which placed him 72nd. So look, if you drafted Coby White and didn't drop him in the first 3 weeks or whatever it was, you get a massive W. Yes, there were some rancid stretches of play towards the end of the season. We saw it in the play-in. First game, crazy. Second game, terrible. And I do worry that maybe there's a little bit of the overdrafting that happens for Coby, of people looking at his season or thinking about his season and inflating how good it actually was, because he was nominated today for Most Improved Player. So he's going to be up for that award. He might win it or he might not. I don't know. But that sort of part there, the people are going to think, he had a way better season than he actually did. And I think that's going to be important to pay attention to for next season, that we just don't go a little bit overboard. Because what if Levine comes back? What if Lonzo comes back? But what if these guys all get moved. That team is one that I have no idea what to do with them at the moment. Absolutely none. And I don't have to because it's in April and the season starts in October. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. It's the easiest and the most exciting way to play and get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players as well. You just pick more or less than 2 to 6 individual player stat projections and you watch the winnings roll in. The NBA playoffs are here, so get in on the playoff action. Win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the postseason. You can win 100 times your money on Prize Picks as well with as little as 4 correct picks, turning $10 into 1,000. Basketball, hockey, whatever it is, over on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. That's what I'm trying to say. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. So download the old Prize Picks app. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Okay, so let's go through some other guys here we had in terms of the guys that were hits. And this is another one similar to the Trae Young, but Alperen Sengun. Right? Sengun was someone that I was very clear on my thoughts on Sengun. I said, I think Sengun can be a top 20 player. I think he's got all the requisite skills to be there. And if I was the coach, I'd be putting him in this position so that he does accumulate those numbers. What I also said was, I'm not really sure where Ime Udoka goes with this because they did try to bring in Brook Lopez. If Udoka's so focused on defense, maybe he limits Sengun, and that leads us to a weird position in terms of where his numbers are. And his ADP was 61. And I think what I said at the time was there's no chance he finishes 61. He's either going to get played a lot and push way up into the top 30, or he's going to get limited and end up 90th. I had him 50th, so I was slightly ahead of ADP there, but again, ahead of him. Now, this is other people might have had him earlier, might have had him in the 30s, and that's congratulations to you guys for doing that. But I was around basically ahead of ADP, and then he did get played more. He got a lot more minutes. He was also a nominee for Most Improved Player. Not really sure about that one, but he did get that nomination there and ended up 33rd. That's a huge win. Obviously, was playing through every single game and then suffered that terrible ankle injury towards the end of the year. Is it a hit to have drafted Sengun in round 6? Yes, I think it is. But again, the injury happens at that time of the year and it wrecks you. You miss the last, 5 weeks of the season and it hurts. But overall, his production definitely was way better than at ADP. And it's all, again, because it's worth remembering that this ADP does not take into consideration, well, we actually think he's going to hurt his ankle in the start of March and he's going to miss the last 5 games. So we're going to bump him down. That's not what any of that does. None of that is taken into consideration. So that, being right by accident, I don't think it's again, shows your process is wrong. This one here, I could have been higher. And like I said, the nuance and context behind it all, that I did like him, but wasn't sure about Ime. Well, Ime did like him for a bit. We'll see what happens next season and how this team's got so many weird parts that need to move in. But yeah, Sengun, I think overall with his 43 fantasy points, ranked him 21st a game. Really, really strong year, really breakout campaign. Was in the discussion for the All-Star game as well. And like I said, nominated for the Most Improved Player Award. If you want to talk another center, I think we've got to go to the passport legend himself. Self with an F. That's the word. The Tooth Fairy, Jalen Duren, who I had 78th in the preseason. He was 93rd on Yahoo. He ended up 49th with his end-of-season ranking. Now, part of the reason that some people weren't interested in drafting him, hence why he's at 93rd, they go, well, what if Monty Williams would just play Bagley and Wiseman? Again, it's why it's really important. The reason people thought that is because at the end of the 22-23 season, that's what they did. They started this weird thing of benching Duren and starting Wiseman and starting Bagley because as they were, trying to lose games, they lost 20 in a row to end that season prior, and just to see what those other guys did. Now, I completely disagree with their process, but that was the thought they had. So people just thought, well, they're just going to run a 3-center rotation. They're going to do a minute split, and Duren's not their guy. But my confidence was, no, he is their guy. He's going to play around 30 minutes a night. And these other guys are trash, and one of those other 2 guys won't play. And that's exactly what happened. And then we saw Bagley get traded. We saw Duren have multiple ankle injuries, which was frustrating. But overall, he's ADP 93. I had him 78th. He ended up 49th on a per game basis. Now, I still have significant questions about his long-term viability in the NBA defensively. I don't really know where he fits because I thought he sucked a lot on that end. And if this team ever wants to go anywhere, and honestly, with the management and ownership that got in place, maybe they don't. So that's possible too. I'm not certain that he is absolutely locked in as a starting center forever, key, core, future piece, because I do have some massive worries about where he is defensively, and he doesn't have that level of game offensively, like a Sengun, that can overcome that. Whereas, like, if you're struggling defensively, look, you better be doing some other pretty snappy stuff on the other end to be able to play enough. And he's not that. He's still really young. That can come. But I thought it was actually a regression from him defensively, even though all of the fantasy stats improved, which they did very clearly. All right. The last one I'm going to talk about is unbelievably the third guy nominated for Most Improved Player. It was Tyrese Maxey. At the start of the year, I and you did not know what would happen to James Harden. We can say that we thought this would happen. We could say that we guessed that this would happen, and that's totally fine. But we did not know. When the season started, James Harden was a member of the Philadelphia 76ers. We didn't know if he was going to come back and play. There was the talk of he was reporting back and he was ramping back up. We didn't know where he would get traded or what sort of player would come back in a trade. Would Daryl Morey send Harden only if he got an all-star level player back? Right? We just didn't know, and then that would mean that Maxey wouldn't take that step forward, that gigantic step forward, and he'd still be sat in this sort of weird position that he was for a period of last season. We just didn't know. What ended up happening was absolute best case for Maxey. Harden never played. The trade was finalized early, and no player came back that had any chance of taking anything away from Maxey. I had him 48th in the preseason, which was ahead of the ADP, which is 57th. Close to a round difference there. So Maxey was going towards the end of round 5. To me, he was a round 4 guy. And I believe I got him in industry pick up around that spot anyway, around 46, 47. But obviously, we were clearly way too low on him. Now, you'll also look at Maxey and go, Josh, he was like a first-round player for the season. Yeah, but no, he was 27th overall because he did have a huge drop-off in the second half of the year when a lot of those fake block numbers from earlier in the year fell away. And then when Embiid went out, the ramp up in usage wasn't offset by how his efficiency really suffered. So again, how we look at him next season, I don't know, because their roster is all over the shop. There's no one there. We don't know who's going to be on that team. We don't know Embiid's health, but it's safe to say he's not coming in at 48 next season, Maxey. But also, could he be an overdraft guy? Would people take him at like 16 or 17? I think that's possible. But Tyrese was 57th in ADP. He ended 27th. I had him 48th. He had a ranking or fantasy points of 42 points, and that ranked him 24th. So again, overall, ahead of the curve on him. Not as high as I needed to be with it, but I still think that considered, or you should consider that, a pretty decent success to get Maxey in that position as a bit of a W going ahead of ADP in that position. Let's talk about some other names, but I just want to quickly roll through here. I didn't include Jalen Johnson on this list. He was one of the guys that I did talk about a lot as a player that we take flyer on at the end of the drafts. I would love for him to get that job immediately. I thought Saddiq Bey was bad, but I thought they would go with Saddiq Bey. So my evaluation of the player was correct. My evaluation of the situation was incorrect. Still got Johnson in a lot of spots and was all about drafting him and getting that value in there. But he doesn't really qualify for this list because I had him 130th and his ADP was 146th or 118th or something like that. It wasn't that big of a difference. Some other names that I did want to talk about quickly here, just for reference sake. I had Herb Jones about 25 spots higher than Yahoo ADP, and I had him bang on basically where he finished, which was around 110th. So as much as Herb is frustrating for category leagues because of the ups and downs of the defensive stats, I was ahead of him. With Porzingis, it's an interesting one because that is a different story. When we talk about like ADP for Sengun, it wasn't priced in assuming that he was going to snap his ankle in March. Like that wasn't that. Porzingis' ADP was priced in for that. So while I had Kristaps at about 33 per game and he finished, I think, 24th per game, his ADP was in the 40s because we expected that he was going to miss some time, and he did. And in the totals game of stuff, he ended up around that mark of the ADP. So I would say it depends on your league type. If you're playing in a roto league, it was probably a W. to get him at that round earlier spot than ADP if you're playing in a head-to-head league. Well, he missed a bunch of time down the stretch, and that there was a level of expectation that maybe that would happen, that they would be a little bit cautious with Porzingis, and they were. So that is part of that evaluation. So that's a real part of that evaluation. So I didn't include him as one of the main ones there. I did have Denny Avdia significantly higher than his ADP, mainly because I did think that he was actually a perfect fit in between Kuzma and Poole. We need a wing who can move the ball, who can defend, because the general consensus heading into this season was that Corey Kispert was going to be the starter. Like when we did all the stuff through July and August, I would put our guy, Avdia's the guy that I think should be starting here, but the general consensus from Wizards people and people in general was like, no, they'll start Kispert. I'm like, okay, that makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to have that player there. So I was like, I think Denny's going to get these minutes. I didn't think he'd end up playing like 39 minutes a night down the stretch and taking as big a step forward as he did. I was a little bit off on him. I mean, I'll just go and look at my numbers. But it wasn't like outrageously off. Like he finished 114th in -1. I had him 130th. And his ADP was like 150. So I was sort of right in the middle there, but not one that I want to highlight significantly. Emmanuel Quickley, the reason I'm not going to include this one is I had Emmanuel Quickley around 120th. And his ADP was at 138. But also with Quickley, I was like a bit sort of gun shy. I was like, I'm not really sure where the minutes go. I think he's really good and I think he should get the minutes, but I don't know what Tibbs is going to do. In the end, he beat that ADP by 40 spots, basically. He ended up 103rd, but that was because he got traded. And while we could have thought that, there doesn't seem to be any momentum to sign him to a contract extension, maybe they trade him away. We didn't know that. We didn't have any like, well, he's definitely being moved, so let's get on him now and hold it and wait till he gets traded and he'll blow up. Because obviously he was so much better in Toronto, so while it ends up being a win, I'm not sure the process is probably right, but the process to get him to as high as he ended up getting was definitely not there. Like, it wasn't like, he's getting traded, so watch. Starting point guard, new team, big usage, 36 minutes a night. Don't think that's going to... That never once entered my head as a reason to look at quickly, 20 spots ahead of ADP. The next one was one that I was into a lot. More so when he was in Portland, and that was Jusuf Nurkic. Because I was like, okay, the Daniel Gafford. Who's the other center? Nurkic might get hurt. We know this. But he does have a very, very good fantasy game. So when he went to Phoenix, I was a little bit softer on him because they had Drew Eubanks as well, who was already his backup. But I was also very confident that Nurkic is better than Eubanks. And the Suns wouldn't be as bad as the Blazers, so he wouldn't get a fake injury through all of March. Shout out to Jeremy Grant. And he'd actually play through it. Nurkic had an ADP of 104. I had him at like 96, so it's just marginally ahead, but I was ahead of that, and I did, as you know, and me and Nurkic, I'm very big on Nurkic's ability as a fantasy player, and was pretty interested in getting him. And the last one there is Bogdan Bogdanovic, who I did end up grabbing late in a lot of drafts. His ADP was 141. I wasn't super, super high on him. That's why I didn't include him in the main portion of this. I had him 131st. Obviously, he ended up ridiculously high. He was great for the year, 74th per game. Huge down the stretch as well. Again, part of his ranking is inflated because Trae got hurt, but he was huge down the stretch. Another guy I was a little bit ahead of. So they're just a bunch of names that I think ended up where some of that is process related, a little bit of luck as always with this stuff, but just trying to look, what do we get right? How do we view these players? How does that value sit? I do think this is a relatively useful exercise for us to go through. So that, as you're well aware, is the fantasy hits. Tomorrow, I think it'll be tomorrow, we'll come back and we'll do the misses, the ones that I was either not high enough on, and ADP was looking better than me, or the ones that I was just too high on and it didn't pan out. And who I'm looking at, the mustache legend in Washington. We know that's going to be a disaster. We know that one. So be aware of that. Actually, one I should have probably had on this, and I don't know why I didn't end up putting him on this list here, is Mikal Bridges. Because I think Mikal Bridges, I would consider that a hit for me, where he was, I think I had him, his -1 rank to begin the year was at 35, and his ADP was about 21. So I was definitely fading off of Mikal Bridges, and I avoided him everywhere. You heard my thoughts on him all preseason. I go, this is ridiculous to have him here. So I faded away from him. I think that worked out pretty well. I realize now why I didn't have Bridges on this list, because I was going to be doing a separate section of because all those ones we just talked about were the ones that I was ahead of ADP on, and it worked out. And then I was going to do a separate section of the guys that I was below ADP on, and then it also worked out for me. And that's where Bridges was, very clearly on that list. But you know what? I went way too long just talking about these positive hits versus the avoid the negatives, which I think is a different thing. So maybe we'll just put that into a separate show because I'm not going to go and give you another 30 minutes on top of this one. So there you go. Ignore that little Mikal Bridges thing. That's a little spoiler for the next show that's going to come up because then we are going to do the ones that are the misses from either direction as well. So yeah, we're talking about the ones here that were players that I was ahead of based on ADP and ended up winning in that sense. They ended up being ahead of ADP as well with a bit of a W there for me. So again, apologies for the old screw up in that situation. Yeah, just the brain sort of switches down in the off-season mode, and that is where we're at. Guys, if you want to and you still want to hit the subscribe button, now would be the time to do it. Ring the bell and leave those comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.